Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the CURT custom fit fifth wheel rails on a 2018 Chevy Silverado 3500. The rails are going to make it to where you can drop in a number of different manufacturer fifth wheels because it is an ISR standard rating, meaning that it uses pretty much uniform matching up to your fifth wheel. So just make sure it follows into that normal standardization and you're going to be able to drop this in. So whether you're using the sliding, like today we have our CURT R20, which is really nice. It's got the carbide black that matches the rails, which is kind of cool. Or if you go with a different manufacturer, not to worry, they're going to work with these rails. Now, having this rail system is really nice too, because if your truck still needs to be a truck and you have to use the bed, you're going to have just your pin and clips that hold your fifth wheel in place. You can pop those out, and obviously with an extra set of hands to lift that heavy fifth wheel out, you can set that aside, and it's really not going to take up much space. You can see it's raised up maybe, I don't know, maybe 3 inches at best, but it does kind of sit nice and flat and uses the corrugations to mount up nice and safe. It does come with all the hardware, and overall this one's actually a pretty easy installation compared to some of the other rails that are out there. So I would set aside maybe about I'd say 2.5 to 3 hours. You could probably get this knocked out. I do recommend having an extra set of hands to get your fifth wheel kind of in and out as you'll be loading it in to kind of get your measurements. But overall, if you follow along with the video, we'll get your rails installed. So let's take a look at it. Now before we begin our installation, we're going to want to go ahead and get our spare tire lowered down and out of the way. That's just going to really open it up, making it a lot easier to have a little bit more real estate while we're working under the vehicle. Now we can start marking out where our rails are going to live, and you're going to want to check the instruction manual. Now, depending if you have the 6.5 foot bed or an 8 foot bed, obviously it's going to change on the measurements, so just double check those. Another thing I'll point out, this one has a spray and bed liner. That is going to add just a little bit to that measurement just because of that undercoating. So when we measure from the end, as that kind of goes over, I always add about 1/8 of an inch to account for that. So whatever your measurement is, add that extra 1/8 of an inch on, and that should put you right in the ballpark. So I'm going to go ahead, measure out 2 spots, and that way we can get our straight line across to get our rail in place. You're going to want to make sure that this is lined up. You're going to have this outside edge here of the rail. This is where we're going to be measuring to. Now we do need to make sure that side to side we're also centered up. The best thing I'd recommend is this center hole. It should be kind of centered up on that corrugation. That's going to get you ballpark close, and then you're going to measure side to side, making sure that we have this aligned properly. So now I'm going to go ahead and mark where we're going to be drilling. Now on this rail it is going to be different than the rear one, so make sure that you're paying attention here. We're going to be using the hole that's closest towards the tailgate in the center, so just kind of center this up as best as you can. And then the outside holes, the front and back of them on both sides, we're going to be doing as well, so make sure you mark those centered up as well. So now that I have everything marked out, I can go ahead and move my rail. Again, this is kind of where it's nice to have those reference marks on the side because we'll be able to put it directly back in place. Now where we have marked for drilling, I'm going to go back with an 1/8 inch drill bit or something small. Basically we're just going to make a pilot hole, and that way when we put our brackets underneath we can visually look up, make sure that it's all aligned. So go ahead, we can drill these out. Now you do want to check underneath the vehicle, make sure there's nothing that's going to be potentially damaged, whether it be wiring harness or fuel tank or lines, anything like that. So another thing too is don't drill all the way. You just want to make sure to go through the bed, but don't go any further if you don't have to. In our wheel well liners, we do have a few Torx bits that we're going to remove. Now, you don't have to completely remove the entire wheel well liner. It's a little excessive. The main thing is your bracket's going to be living right in this spot. You can see where there's some weld nuts here that we're going to be utilizing. So that's going to kind of slide up there. But just to give us a little bit more room to work with, I'm going to pull these 2 off. And this is kind of like a textured hard carpet, I guess you call it. You can kind of peel that back just to give you that space. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on both sides of the vehicle. This is a, let's see what we got here, a T15, so a small little Torx bit. So go ahead, you can get these removed and then just hold on to those for later installation. Go ahead and grab your side brackets. Now, it is going to be side specific. You can see this one has kind of a notch rather than the rounded edge. Rounded edge is going to face towards the cab, so just make sure that on your passenger side you have this one, and these are going to go in towards the frame. So what we'll do is we're going to feed this in from the outside, and we're looking to align our holes here. Now, granted, until we have bolts in, it's not going to be flush against it, but we can see right here, everything's lining up. Now, underneath, we need to make sure those pilot holes that we drilled are lined up. It's going to be hard to see these. So what I recommend doing is underneath the truck, kind of have your finger kind of reached around here to where you can hold this in place up flush against the bottom of the bed, and then reach up. Now, you may have some, from drilling, you might have a little shrapnel there, so just kind of be careful. If you need gloves, go ahead and do that. But you're going to want to reach and make sure that in the holes up top, that we have our pilot holes nice and centered up. That may be a little bit tricky to understand, so I'm going to show you underneath kind of what I'm doing. I have my hand on the outside of the frame rail, holding onto our bracket, just kind of raising this up to where our holes are aligned. So have a finger kind of ready to where it should be sitting in its place. Push it against the bed, and then again, reach up to where that bracket is. You should feel those drill marks. Now, this is very important because this is going to kind of set that front rail. If it is off, you are going to need to re-drill those holes to make sure that they are centered up. So go ahead and do that on both sides. So same thing over here. Again, tough to see, but kind of just raise this up, feeling that bracket hole, and I feel we have our pilot hole there. So we're looking good. Now, while we had our side rails kind of in place, just eyeballing, I also checked to make sure that there's no hindrance as far as wires or brake lines, anything like that that could get in the way, and it looks like we're clear. So we're going to head back up with our step bit. Now, we're going to be drilling it out to 9/16. I can go a little bit larger, and I've had better issues or a little bit better tolerances when I go a little bit larger, and that way you're not having to fight these down. And also, if it is a little bit tight when dropping in your fifth wheel, you have the ability to loosen it up a little bit later on, get it custom fit, and then tighten it back down. So pretty easy here. Where we have our pilot holes, we're happy with them. We'll just go ahead, drill this out. And just kind of have your carriage bolt ready, kind of test fit in there. So again, if you go a little bit larger, I think it's actually kind of a better thing. You don't want to go too large for slop. But once we have it here, I recommend going back with a file. Just kind of file this out, and then we'll vacuum up our shavings. So now we're just going to go through and enlarge our remaining holes, and then go ahead and file those out. We're then going to vacuum it up. And then I'm going to put a little bit of paint. Since we have raw metal here, you can use spray paint. Black spray paint will work fine, or a clear coat. I have a paint marker here, so I'm just going to coat that raw metal edge. That way it doesn't turn to rust and corrosion long term. Now we have our holes enlarged. We're going to wait to put our carriage bolts through there, but we are going to get our side plates mounted up, or at least started to be mounted up loosely. All of this we're going to wait to really crank down. We want to leave it just hand tight. That way we have a little bit of adjustability. Now when we raise this up, part of these are going to be weld nuts, and that's going to make it really easy to feed our large bolts, a split washer, and the large flat washer in place. Now these can get a little bit tricky just from buildup. These ones are threading in fine, but if you're struggling with that, you may want to clean them out with a little penetrating oil, and a tube brush works pretty well. You can also kind of just use this as a runner with an impact, kind of run it in and out, or if you have a similar bolt or even a tap, but ours are going pretty well here, so hopefully that's the case for yours. So once you get one side hand tightened in, you should have these holes also lined up with the other holes. So just the thread-in portions are going to be the bottom outmost holes, but go ahead and repeat on the opposite side as well. Now you might have been wondering about the other two holes in the bracket as well as the extra hardware that's in the kit. Well, 2016 and newer, you have the weld nuts, so that's pretty nice. You can just put those in place. You don't have to use a fish wire technique. So if you're wondering what about the other holes and what about the extra hardware, you don't have to worry about that, because with those bolts in place, that's going to do the job of holding those in place. So now let's head up to the bed and we'll start dropping our hardware in. Now where we enlarge those holes, we should be able to see our brackets lining up really well with the holes that we enlarged. So that's a good sign. We can drop in our rail. Now we're going to be using the carriage bolts here, but we do have these U-shaped spacers, and these will go either on the top or the bottom of the bed, and this is just to make sure that that corrugation doesn't crush down, or rib crush as they call it. So this front one here, this just drops in because this sits flush. Now on the bottom side, we're going to be putting this spacer as well as another spacer, but the ones that sit in the corrugation, we are going to want to take that U-shaped spacer, and it's just going to fill that void to make sure that it's, again, not crushing down. So just kind of slide that into where it sits in the corrugation nicely, and then pass your carriage bolts down. We'll go ahead and repeat that for the remainder 3. Now something else that I can suggest doing, it's kind of up to you, but when you go to put the hardware from underneath, sometimes these are going to push up and it gets really hard to thread. So 2 options. You can put weight on here to kind of keep these to where it's not going to push up, or you can even do a little dab of super glue just to kind of keep that in place. It's just going to make it that much easier to thread it. Sometimes these can kind of get tight spaces, and when this is pushing up and you're trying to get that thread started, it can get tricky. So up to you what you want to do, but again, at least have it to where they're not going to pop up. Now that we have our carriage bolts passed down, we're going to go ahead and get our hardware on the bottom side attached. Now on our center one, since we didn't use that U-shaped spacer, we're going to use it on the underside, and again, just to kind of prevent that corrugation from smashing down. Now all of them, we are going to be using this spacer block here, so make sure you're grabbing that one. So our center one, pretty easy to get to. So just put your U-shaped spacer in place, your spacer block, and then we're going to be using our serrated flange nuts for all of these. So go ahead, just make sure that these are hand tightened in place. So it is, again, going to be pretty tight up here, so just go ahead, make sure you get your spacer block in place and the serrated flange nut. Now on the passenger side, there's a little gap in the heat shield to where you should be able to get those a little bit easier. Now when it comes to our rear rail, I'll show you a little trick to kind of make it a little bit easier later on. But for now, go ahead, get your hardware all hand tightened in place. Now at this point, you're going to want to grab the 5th wheel that you're going to be using with the vehicle. Now if you have multiple 5th wheels, I highly suggest dropping both of them in. There may be a little bit of tolerance differences, and you want to make sure that it's not going to bind. Sometimes these can get really tight and then you have to pry them out. You want this to be able to drop in. So what we'll do to make sure that it's seated properly, there is some variance side to side. Because of this one being a slider, it's kind of designed that way, so you don't have to fully install all of it, especially if it's going to be a non-sliding. It's going to be pretty sturdy, but this one does kind of go side to side. But all of them, I do recommend put your pins in place in the rail when you drop it in. That's really going to make sure that it's lined up properly. There's nothing worse than getting these in and then the pins won't align. Now what you're going to want to do is push the 5th wheel forward towards the cab, and then we're going to pull our rails back, and you can use a dead blow hammer here to kind of make sure that it's cinched up nice. So just kind of pushing forward here. I'll go ahead with my dead blow. I'm just going to kind of lean against this. Hit this back on both ends. And then we're going to measure side to side, making sure that we're still even. You can also measure from that front rail to make sure that your measurements are lining up. So a little bit different than the front. We are going to be using the same hole that's towards the tailgate here in the center, but we're going to be using the 3rd holes from the inside. So they're going to go right into the top of that corrugation. So we don't need to use the U spacers on the top, but remember on the bottom side, we will need to use those so it doesn't crush. So I'll go ahead, get this marked out. Just make sure, again, it's nice and cinched up and tight. That way it's going to fit in. And then I can go ahead, you can move your base once you kind of get some markings out. I'm going to go ahead and just drill out the holes with the pilot, just make sure that they're aligned. And with our pilot holes made, we're going to go ahead and look underneath, push that rail again. You should have it hand tightened, but push it up. Make sure that those holes are properly aligned with the bracket. That way when we enlarge it out, we're able to pass our bolts through. I'm using a multi-tool, and what I'm going to do is just cut back a section of it that's going to be right where our bracket is, and then just kind of peel that back, and that way we're going to have access to those, and that way we don't have to cut the whole heat shield. We can kind of just tuck that back. It's not going to cause any issues. You don't have to take this off. I'm going to take it off. That way I can show you guys at home what it looks like when I trim. So you can see with this little section cut out, I'm just with my pair of gloves on. Obviously it's going to be pretty sharp here, but I can kind of just tuck this heat shield back and press it down so it's not rattling against the bed or anything like that. But now we have access to when we have our hardware in place for tightening it down, and it's a lot easier than trying to take these off. Now again, if you want to take your heat shield off, you can. These are notoriously kind of tricky. Sometimes those bolts will break off. So this is the workaround. Hopefully this helps you. So now that we've determined that everything's lined up on our brackets, we can go ahead and we're going to enlarge the holes, get it filed out, and then paint it just like we did our front rail. So go ahead and do that. And then once we have that ready, you can get your rail in place, drop your carriage bolts down, and start bolting it from underneath. So now that we have all of our hardware in, I recommend putting that fifth wheel back in place, put the pins in place just like it's mounted up, and we're going to tighten down our hardware. Now, all of the hardware that's underneath here, the carriage bolts that we pass down, it's going to be a 3/4 inch, and then our side bolts that go into those weld nuts are going to be a 15/16. So go ahead, get them all snug down. We are going to be coming back with a torque wrench, and this is kind of where it gets to be the tricky part. Is some of them up top and even up in these frame rails, it can get a little bit tricky, so you may have to use a crow's foot to get to them. And the torque setting that you find for the bottom ones is going to be different than the side ones, so double check the instruction manual for those torque settings and adjust accordingly. So I'm going to go through, I'll get everything tightened down, and then torque accordingly. Now, we are going to follow a specific way. We're going to go ahead and do all the bottom ones first, and that way it's going to kind of cinch that up and then tighten down the side. You're going to do the same thing with the torque setting after that. But go ahead, get all your hardware, tighten and torque down. Now I mentioned that it is going to be kind of tight on some of the ones that you've noticed already tightening down, and to get a torque wrench up there, using a crow's foot's not a bad idea. That's going to give you that attachment point to where you have a little bit of small space here to work with to get those tightened down. So do whatever you need to get these all torqued down properly, and then that should be pretty much it for the installation. Now before hitting the road, make sure you get your fender liner screws back in, as well as your spare tire up. And then all that's left to do, put your fifth wheel in the rails, hook up to your trailer, and get to towing. And that was a look and installation of the CURT custom fifth wheel rails for a 2018 Chevy Silverado 3500.